Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Akamoff, Social Media Coordinator with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we are live streaming here with an update on the Paralytic Shellfish Poison event. I'm joined today by Matt Hunter, Shellfish Project Manager for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Alexis Manderson, Food Safety Specialist with the Oregon Department of Agriculture, and Dr. Emilio Debess, State Public Health Veterinarian with the Oregon Public Health Division's Acute and Communicable Disease Prevention Section. Matt, would you like to begin today?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. This has been an unprecedented event in Oregon. As most of you may or may not know, we've had a paralytic shellfish poisoning event in Oregon that we have never seen in the state. So this is something that is very unprecedented with the number of species that it is impacted, as well as individuals getting sick from this paralytic shellfish poisoning. So just to kind of go over a brief timeline of what actually occurred. But first, I want to give a little background of what paralytic shellfish poisoning is. We call it PSP because the other words, it's a mouthful. But this is caused by a phytoplankton. It's a dinoflagellate. It's called Alexandrium, and it produces a group of toxins called saxitoxins. And these are all naturally occurring. The phytoplankton is naturally occurring. It's been in the historic database of phytoplankton for decades, maybe even a century or more. And when these are in the right conditions and they bloom, there's a lot of them. They produce this saxitoxin, which can then be accumulated in shellfish. And then if people ingest the shellfish, then they can get the symptoms of paralytic shellfish poisoning. So basically what happened on May 17th of this year, we had biotoxin results from mussels from the central coast of Oregon. That would be our Lincoln City and Seal Rock, and on the north coast, which was Cape Meares. And they had elevated levels of PSP, but they were still below the closure threshold. And there was no other PSP detected in Oregon coast. And there hadn't been PSP detected in Oregon, even in the previous samples as well. So because of these results that were above the non-detect threshold, but were not at the closure threshold, ODA and ODF&W ran further samples that were unscheduled the following week. So on May 23rd, the next biotoxin results came out, and the areas that we had sampled, which were the Cape Meares, Seal Rock, and Lincoln City, Cape Meares had increased but was still below the threshold. Seal Rock had actually decreased, and Lincoln City was just above the threshold. So ODF&W and Department of Ag effectively closed the area from Seal Rock north to Cape Lookout, which is just south of Cape Meares, to all mussel harvesting, and that was effective on May 23rd. On the morning of May 26th, the Oregon Poison Center, along with the Oregon Health Authority, contacted the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Department of Agriculture, indicating that individuals had become sick and were symptomatic of paralytic shellfish poisoning. ODF&W and Department of Agriculture effectively closed the areas from Seal Rock all the way to Cape Lookout to mussel harvesting. And so then those areas that had already been closed, we had closed even more. So basically on the I guess it was on the 26th is when the people came. So we closed from Cape Lookout all the way to the Oregon-Washington border. And that was effective on the 26th. And then on the 28th, more individuals, almost 2 dozen, had been confirmed with PSP. And so further samples were collected, not only from different areas, but also including different species for this PSP analysis. And then on May 30th, there were preliminary results coming out showing that PSP was high in bay clams, in oysters, and mussels, and also in South Coast razor clams. So what this did is ODA and ODF&W immediately closed all mussel harvesting on the coast of Oregon. They closed all razor clam harvesting from Yachats River to the Oregon-California border, and they closed all bay clam harvest from the Oregon-Washington border to Cascade Head, and all oyster sales from Netarts and Tillamook Bay were suspended. And so that's where we're at this time.
Matt and maybe Alexis, I wonder if you could just briefly give a quick overview of sort of how Oregon Department of Agriculture and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife sort of manage these types of issues together, especially with regard to toxic shellfish testing.
So Department of Agriculture has the state lab that tests for shellfish. Our lab is the state certified shellfish lab that's recognized by the FDA for testing shellfish for marine biotoxins. So the process for doing that is that we would have staff go out and collect samples of shellfish either from the locations that they can be found in the wild, or we may obtain them from commercial harvesting operations like oyster farmers, and then we send those samples in. We get an official sample and send it to our lab, and it gets analyzed for those toxins. In this case, we're looking at PSP toxin, but we also test for domoic acid, which has been in the news a lot as well. And so once we get those results in, we coordinate with Department of Fish and Wildlife to take whatever action may be necessary, which is either just posting results if they're all below the limit, and just communicating what their sampling results indicated, or if there's over the limits in different areas, then we'll work with them to figure out what's an appropriate area to close, and getting that messaging out to as many media type outlets as possible. And then following that, we'll develop a plan to resample those areas, monitor like what is going on, if the number levels are going up or down, with the intent of getting those reopened again as soon as is safe. And our policy with that is that we will not open an area until we have 2 clear samples consecutively, taken no less than a week apart. So we want to see a nice good trend there. We don't want to just open and then have to close again. So we would need 2 clean samples a week apart to get something opened up again.
Thank you. I wonder if someone might be able to talk a little bit about PSP, or paralytic shellfish poison. I feel like a lot of the toxins out there, that one sort of, it's in the name. But could anybody talk a little bit about that particular toxin? It's not one we see a lot, but it's obviously here in numbers now.
Well, I guess I can speak to it a little bit. So PSP is the one that is, I guess, most commonly known. A lot of people refer to it as a red tide, even though they don't make a red tide, but that's kind of the misnomer that it's obtained. So, there's a long history of PSP along the Pacific coast. I mean, you can go back into, I believe it was Captain Vancouver, his crew got mussels, and a number of them became sick and died. So this has been around for centuries, and so it's pretty well known. We've had some large closures in Oregon. 92 was one that had a large closure that impacted a lot of different fisheries, but since then domoic acid has been the big player that has closed most fisheries. So it seems like we've seen assemblage shifts in what our phytoplankton are. We've gone from, at times where it's been a dinoflagellate dominated assemblage, and now we've kind of, in the last few years, been more into a diatom, which is what produces domoic acid assemblage. And so now it seems like something's shifting, and we're seeing this very large Alexandrian bloom. It's causing this PSP. I mean, these are unprecedented levels that we're seeing, and especially in bay clams and oysters. I don't think we've seen the peak yet in our mussels, and maybe even our razor clams, but those are still, we need more testing to be able to determine where we're at. And if I doubt we're at the decline, because we're seeing Washington have some closures, and I haven't heard if California has, but I would be very surprised if this isn't an event that's covering all 3 states.
Okay. I want to run through some questions that we had. One question: why didn't you close sooner? On Sunday, May 26th, it said that we could still harvest bay clams within the Seal Rock to Washington mussel closure border area. Just some clarification on kind of how the closure works.
Well, I'll just start with, the levels went up incredibly quickly, and so we reacted as fast as we could with the sampling that we did. For example, the seal rock result on the 23rd was at 46, which is well under the limit. That's about half. And then the samples that were taken on the 28th, that same sampling area was 10 times higher. It was in the 400s. So it was a dramatic jump. And, we reacted as quickly as we could. We closed the areas that we felt were impacted right away. And, we can't test all the time, and there's going to be gaps in our testing. It takes time from when we collect a sample to when the lab reports out that result. And so, we've tried to adapt as quickly as we can to this event, but it's caught a lot of us off guard a little bit with the intensity that those numbers climbed, from what was below some of those closure thresholds to well over in just a matter of days.
Matt, I don't know if you want to jump in a little bit, but what are some of the challenges around sampling? I think sometimes it's not easily understood that there are challenges around even getting samples. What are some of those challenges for you when you're out attempting to get samples?
Well, I think the first thing we need to realize is that these are intertidal animals, which means they're not always accessible to be able to get samples from. So, just like harvesting, you can't harvest every single day of the month. So you have to go at low tides. Well, low tides happen basically every 10 days. So, we're kind of constrained on when we can obtain the samples, but also when we can get them through the lab so that they can be processed according to the FDA guidelines, so that they can then be analyzed appropriately. Because a lot of these are for human consumption, but also for recreational guidelines. So those are some of the issues we have. I know that we have 350 miles of coastline. It's a lot of coastline to sample, and so you have to pick primary areas where you have the bulk of the harvest, or in some instances just where the species where you can get a sample consistently. And we've seen that as also a kind of an issue. Is there's some areas you can't get samples during certain times of the year. And so we end up with these long closure periods because you just can't effectively get samples to open something up. So those are the big issues. And, like Alex stated, we didn't have the information. And, there is a safety factor built into these closure thresholds. And so that's for this reason. If we have these large blooms that come out of, basically nowhere, because we just can't predict that, then we have these safety margins that are built in so that if there's a gap in our sampling, it's hopefully going to alleviate these kind of problems. This one just happened to be one of those cases that was outside of that. So the bay clam situation, we don't see it in bay clams very much. The last time we had it in bay clams was 1992. So, that's several decades. So if you look back at our recent history, bay clams, or pretty much anything in the estuaries, aren't impacted by these marine toxins, unless it's at very, very high levels. And as we're getting more information, we're finding out more and more that, this is very, very high level. So, we'll forget the information and we close as we can.
Thanks.
Hey, this is Megan here. We have a question from Raymond for Dr. Debess. He would like to know what the symptoms of paralytic shellfish toxin poisoning are.
Yeah, hi, good morning, and thank you for the question. In most cases, what we've seen is people having tingling of the face, mouth, and then later they develop tingling of the fingers, and some people do develop vomiting and diarrhea. So about 95% of the cases showed up to the emergency room with symptoms compatible with paralytic shellfish poison.
Maybe to tie into that a little bit, should we throw out any shellfish we harvested recently from any area of the coast? And if so, from how long ago should we do that?
So our first reports came in on Sunday through the Oregon Poison Center. So as far as we know, it was a collections that happened over the weekend, over the long holiday weekend. We don't have any other cases reported before that. We have looked at our emergency room data to try to identify cases previous to that, and we haven't been able to see any other or identify any other human cases.
And Dr. Debess, maybe you could just highlight that you are doing a survey to try to find out if other people were impacted. Can you talk a little bit about that survey and the purpose of it?
Yeah, thank you for that. We do have an online survey that has been or will be sent out to individuals about the potential for having symptoms compatible with this particular shellfish poisoning. And that's just to get an assessment as to how many people actually got sick. We have reported in the past that about 20 individuals got sick. We're getting few more cases, just a couple of additional cases, but we really are interested in learning more about the totality of cases, people that potentially had very mild symptoms, and that information would be included in the survey. So please take the time to complete the survey, especially if you had symptoms compatible with shellfish poisoning. Thank you.
Thanks.
This is
Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, thanks. So Megan here again. Dan is asking, did we say that it is possible for paralytic shellfish poisoning to affect razor clams? And then we've got a follow-up question for that on climate change, so we can take one at a time.
So yeah, razor clams can accumulate paralytic shellfish poisoning toxins, and they currently do have it. We've seen it in, the South Coast samples from Coos Bay and Florence showed elevated levels, but we've seen it historically as well. They don't have the propensity to accumulate it like mussels. Mussels are constantly filter feeding when they're inundated with water. So if it's in the system, mussels are going to get it. They're kind of our canary in the mine shaft, so to speak. If there's going to be PSP in the water, mussels will more than likely get it. Razor clams, they're not filtering as often, so they don't seem to accumulate it as quickly. So there could be, anywhere from several days to a week or more before you see it accumulated in a razor clams. So yes, they can get it. It just takes longer for them to accumulate it to levels that would be noticeable by the tests or even at closure thresholds. And, regarding the climate change, I think it's pretty apparent that our oceans have been changing. I don't think that there is any debate to that. And I think that what we're seeing is that our harmful algal blooms that are producing these toxins that close down fisheries and can impact people have not only been increasing in their frequency, but also in their toxicity and in the duration that these animals and fisheries are impacted.
Yeah, and this is Alex again with the Department of Agriculture, and I just wanted to follow on from that question you had, Timothy, that these toxins, they can't be cooked out and they can't be frozen out. So if you do have shellfish that were harvested basically since the weekend, you should throw them out because there's no way you can render them safe now. So just to be clear about that. So cooking is not going to get rid of that toxin. It's not going to make them safe.
Okay, so basically back to that last weekend or the weekend before, if you've harvested since then.
Right. Yep.
Okay. And then something that maybe plays right into what Matt was just saying as well, with regard to, this is mostly focused on filter feeders that are picking up that PSP. Got a question from somebody who's wondering about harvesting other things like seaweed. I know there's also some questions about crabs and whether you can get it in some of these other species or vegetation like seaweed that people might harvest. What can we say about that?
Well, seaweed is, since they're not a filter feeder, the only way you would get it is if, the toxin was so thick in the water that it, became impregnated in the cells of the seaweed, which I think is pretty remote. Other, these are, you're going to see some trophic transfer. So that basically means up the food web. So filter feeders are, they're your primary consumers. So they're going to get it first. Yes, you will see it move up the trophic level or up the food chain. To what degree, we don't really know that so much with PSP. There's more information and more data, more research on domoic acid on trophic transfer. We don't really have a lot of information on that right now, at least not in Oregon, on paralytic shellfish poison transfer. I would not be surprised if it could, but to what degree, I don't really have that knowledge at this time.
And Matt, could you talk just a little bit about how long it takes to clear these toxins from your experience working with clams in Oregon?
Well, like I said, we haven't had a PSP event like this for quite a while. But I mean, mussels are unique, as they can accumulate it very rapidly, as we've seen. They also tend to cleanse it or depurate it rather quickly compared to other bivalves. So, we've seen levels that have been, the closure threshold's 80. We've seen levels that have been in the several hundreds that'll take them, 2, 3, maybe a month, 2, 3 weeks, maybe a month to depurate. Whereas, other animals such as razor clams, I mean, it can take several months to a year or more for them to get rid of levels that are that high. We haven't seen levels that high. I think they're maybe back in the, I want to say 70s or 80s. It's been a long time since we've seen levels that high in razor clams. So, bay clams, I don't have much information on that just because we haven't had levels this high. I would imagine that they're going to be faster than razor clams, but slower than mussels. Testing is really the only way we can determine how fast they do it. And it just depends on how much feed's available. And it depends if this bloom persists. I mean, if it disappears overnight, they're going to depurate it a lot quicker than if it just lingers around and continues to produce toxin. It'll take longer and longer for them to cleanse it out. So there's a lot of moving parts to this.
Okay. I've got a question from media. Will climate change have an impact on PSP? Will it increase the frequency of PSP occurring?
I think yes. I mean, we've shown that the changing of the oceans has definitely increased the frequency, the duration, and the toxicity of all of our biotoxins, and I think that that's seen worldwide. So, I mean, that's definitely something that we're going to have to do adaptive management for.
And then maybe you could elaborate just a little bit on, just again, based on the things you've seen in the past, but why did all this PSP and domoic acid hit the coast all at once? Is the ocean warmer? Were there algal blooms? Is this another heat wave? Do you have any idea of what might be precipitating this sort of really quick rise in PSP numbers on the coast?
Well, we haven't. So it's kind of interesting. So I want to kind of differentiate between the PSP and the domoic acid, because we really haven't seen any domoic acid since it's been several months, probably not since the fall of last year. And the levels that we've had in razor clams, that's what we call legacy toxins. So they, like I said, razor clams, they get rid of it so slowly that it can take months for it to come out, or longer, depending on how high they were. So this PSP event, when we do our phytoplankton sampling, Pseudonychia, which causes domoic acid, is one of those that we can kind of enumerate the number of cells and to kind of determine what thresholds we might see them produce toxin. With Alexandrium, it's pretty much anytime we see it in our phytoplankton samples, we're concerned that there's going to be a PSP event, because they produce so much, and they're also very mobile, so they're very difficult to see within our samples. So, why this happened so quickly, I'm not exactly sure. I think this is going to lead to a lot of questions and probably some further research to know where this originated. Was this something that came offshore and was advected inshore? Since these are dinoflagellates, they produce cysts. Maybe there was a bed of cysts that then germinated and all of a sudden they were there near shore. I think that there's still a lot of questions that we don't know, but obviously there is a very large, paralytic shellfish or Alexandrian bloom that's creating this saxitoxin along the Oregon coast.
And then Alexis, I think you may have mentioned this, but is there going to be any changes in the testing regime just based on the sort of expansive size of this particular PSP issue?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be testing more and more frequently for a while. So, we've just continued to expand what we've been testing above our standard surveillance level of monitoring in the last couple of weeks, and that's just going to continue because we're still trying to figure out what the impact is to this. And there's some areas that our lab only has so much capacity, and so we've tried to prioritize what we'll be testing to begin with, and so. Now that we have some areas closed, the focus is going to shift to, okay, the areas that are still open, are they continue to be safe, and just checking other species as well. So the testing that we will be doing in the next, weeks anyway, is going to be an expansion on what we have been doing up until now. So it will just continue and more of it.
Okay, that wraps up most of the questions I'm familiar with. We may get more questions that will come in. We can run those back by you and answer in the comments. I just wanted to give you three an opportunity. Is there anything else you'd want to leave out there for folks just as a parting message?
Well, we're always posting the results that we're getting as soon as we get them, and we also have the ability for the public to call up. We have a hotline as well as a desk, shellfish desk, where most of the time there's someone that can answer questions. And so if people have concerns, we're here to try to address those. So our website is a great resource to get information, ODFW as well. And so we'll be keeping that updated with all of our testing and kind of next steps as the weeks progress. So just reach out if you have any questions.
Okay, well, we will leave those phone numbers as well as links up in both of these live streams. And the survey that Dr. Debess mentioned earlier, you can find it on our social media, ODFW social media, as well as Oregon Health Authority. And we'll be continuing to tweet the link out for that coming up. I just want to say thank you to everyone, Dr. Debess, Alexis, Matt, thank you very much for taking some time to talk to us about this issue. Appreciate it.
Not a problem.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.